Hey, hi, welcome to the Acid Left. I'm Mike Watson here with my regular co-host Adam Ray Adkins, and we're performing a cover reveal of my forthcoming book, The Memeing of Mark Fisher, coming out in September. And yeah, basically we're going to show you what's happening there on the jacket. And Adam's here with a few questions, having read the text. So, Adam, let's get
Hey,
straight
Mike.
into it.
I wanted to ask you, first of all, should we judge a book by its cover?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean,
Since
I
it is a
guess.
cover reveal, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I think covers and titles do kind of entice people. So I guess it gives you some idea of who the publisher or author is trying to kind of appeal to, who they think it should appeal to. So, I mean, that should give you some idea of what's in it anyway. So we see the title here without the full jacket design, The Memeing of Mark Fisher, which I guess is a play on the word meaning, but also about memes. Um, and then how the Frankfurt School foresaw capitalist realism and what to do about it. So basically, it talks about the Frankfurt School, how they heavily influenced Mark Fisher. It actually goes through several Frankfurt School thinkers, bringing Fisher to each analysis of their thought and how their thought is relevant to today's scene, Twitch, QAnon, TikTok dancers, um, TikTok witches. What else do we have there?
A lot of internet culture.
There's a lot of it, yeah, a lot of memes there that have gone into the Doomer memes, gone into Wojak. Yeah, there's a lot there. It's nearly all referencing meme culture actually, and Fisher. And there's a dedicated chapter to Mark Fisher called "The Memeing of Mark Fisher," in which we talk about how Fisher basically has become a meme and how that kind of is a co-optation of him in the same way that he saw Kurt Cobain as co-opted, and generally anyone who tries to rebel being co-opted by capitalism. So the ultimate, or probably most famous, kind of theorist of the co-optation of leftists by capital has been co-opted by basically by the algorithms.
And purposefully, or like, and well done. It's like as soon as you put out this title, people were already saying, "Wait, is this a real book or is this a meme?" Which I
Yeah, and
think is
then kind
great.
of, I think saying that it was itself somehow clickbait. But the thing is, it's like you can't do a book about that without engaging with it. So it's kind of an in-depth. How could you say? Like if you're a sociologist, you'd be like going underground as a. How do you call this when you like become the thing to try and understand it? It's kind of that kind of research.
Yeah,
You would
like
say in
method
philosophy.
acting.
Yeah, like I mean, in sociology, you do this. Like you want to organize some research on football hooligans. You can actually become, part of their football hooligan gang, and then there's kind of ethical considerations around that. It's kind of a bit like that, and but also what in philosophy you'd call immanent critique. That's like critique by actually practicing the thing you're critiquing or thinking through that lens. Or it can be used to mean that, and I guess that's what's happening here to some degree. And of course, Fisher himself was, in any sense, memeing. He had Facebook groups one of them he actually closed down. I talk about that in the book. He was a blog poster, and he used kind of snappy meme type slogans, and like capitalist realism, Tina, there is no alternative. So he was kind of a theorist that was moving into the new age of tech, but the age we're in now is post Fisher because he's no longer with us. But I think it would be a bit post Fisher anyway because he would be in his 50s, I think. You just get the impression that he would be just find this stuff kind of annoying. But you can't answer those questions because Fisher wouldn't be witnessing the memeing of his own theory to this degree if he was alive, because so much of the theory is coming from young kids who are taken in a bit by his life story.
So, without further ado, drum roll, fireworks, high dive. Let's see that cover.
Okay, yeah, here we go.
Appropriately.
Here you go.
It
Here's
is
the cover.
a meme.
Yeah. It's a very, very memeable cover, which I expect to be played around with by people, probably offensively in some cases. And
well, because you're appropriating gamer culture, right?
Yeah, and just because it's, I guess people will find it funny to play around with it. I hope anyway. So it says it's this "Are you winning, son?" meme, which has been going for a few years. It's discussed in the book in some depth, and it has the guy in the doorway is actually Adorno. So some people will see that as Adorno immediately. Some people won't, but it is Adorno, and he's saying that to his kid in the original meme. The funny thing is, the meme I think was on 4chan, that the kid was actually engaged in some kind of, cyber sex video game or something. So
and now he's making a Fisher
yeah,
meme. So
yeah. So it's something very different. But the point is that the father just didn't get what the son was doing because of generational gaps or whatever. But now it's Adorno, and he's saying, "Are you winning, son?" And the son is making a Fisher meme, and it is the kind of Fisher Wojak that actually is used on Instagram, and it's been made by somebody, not by me, but I've redrawn it. I think that's quite important to note that all of this I've redrawn in Photoshop. So whilst it is very much similar to the original "Are you winning, son?" memes, or some of the variants of the "Are you winning, son?" memes, and the Mark Fisher Wojak, it's actually a reinterpretation that's very close. But anyone can use mine. I'm not going to ever say it's got a copyright on the back. Bizarrely, it's been copyrighted to my name. I think the publisher doesn't want it copyrighted to their name because of the complexities of meme copywriting. But I'm not going to ever say like it's my image. I'm welcoming people to come and change it, and I also thank anyone who made the original memes.
So what we're going to do today is I've read the book. It comes out soon. And I wrote down some questions for you. And these are things that you have not seen. So I'm not like trying to lob stuff out you that you already know and you have pre-prepared answers for. But I wanted to get into that. And first was just an observation. I think the book is really well written and digestible, but I also think it's a bit deeper than your last book, Can the Left Learn to Meme? And I like that book a lot. It's what led us to working together so much. And you give these great introductions and overviews of all the thinkers, but I think you spend a lot more time actually developing and applying your own thought in this book than in the last one. And I was wondering if that was a conscious decision, and if so, like what led you to take this more serious but still fun and approachable direction?
Yeah, I think the last book when I wrote it, when I started writing it, I was teaching in BA departments, bachelor's level media theory, in 2 universities in Rome, in Italy, American universities they were. So I think I was really appealing to my students, even though I actually finished teaching by the time I finished the book. But I think I was trying to appeal to a generation of younger millennials and actually Gen Z. Some of them would be Zoomers. And so I think that's partly, I think trying to like really take something quite complex and explain it to a generation that maybe didn't even know their own generation's culture that well. Maybe they didn't know vaporwave that well, for example, or some of the meme references in the book. But also I wanted to explain to the art world, because it starts talking about the art world and how the art world isn't kind of like open, isn't kind of like democratic. So I wanted to explain to the art world why meme culture is better. So it's kind of trying to explain, to young people who maybe don't know Adorno very well, but then to the art world who don't know memes very well, what's going on. So I guess that's why. But then the other thing is, this book was written under lockdown, and it was a difficult time for everyone. So I think the seriousness of this book and the kind of rather more extreme political stance, I think, because it's more personalized, because I'm really kind of saying like we need to do this, and it's fairly radical. I think that comes out of the very difficult situations we've all been in,
Yeah, actually, that's a good way of thinking about it. That your earlier books do feel more like art books in a way that delve into philosophy and into politics as essential parts of them. But this one feels much more a philosophical, political book that delves into art and aesthetics. So you use 4 main thinkers besides Fisher, of course, and you elaborate on their ideas throughout the text. They're Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Herbert Marcuse, and Walter Benjamin. And I found it really compelling the way that you compared and contrasted all of these thinkers. And so I have two questions. Like, first is like, what unites the four in their thoughts? Like, what makes these four together? Besides that they were associated with the Frankfurt School or belong to it. Like, what's the kernel there that brings them together? But then also, you devote a whole chapter on the differences and arguments between Adorno and Marcuse. But I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more the arguments that Adorno and Horkheimer had with Walter Benjamin, because I was unaware of that, and you go over that as well in the text.
Okay, there's quite a lot there, but basically, I think all of those four Frankfurt School thinkers, and actually Benjamin sometimes considered to not be in the Frankfurt School, but because the Frankfurt School is a loose grouping of people who basically were employed by a private institution, and because Benjamin did get money from that institution, the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, I do put him in with the Frankfurt School, because it's like a slang term for those people who are kind of orbiting around that institute. So Benjamin and Fischer, they all basically see culture as somehow vital to the left-wing mission. So, they take on board what Marx says about economics, but they also see culture as important for its kind of disorientating effect, or the way it can destabilize a false consciousness engendered by capitalism. So that's basically why I think they're all similar, and that's something that Fischer was very aware of, and Fischer referenced them, and every indication of his introduction for his unfinished book, Acid Communism, was that book would have really gone into depth on the Frankfurt School, on Adorno particularly, and Marcuse. But as for the different arguments that happened, well, Horkheimer and Adorno, actually, they were supervising Benjamin's Arcades project. So basically this ended up being a huge text that was unfinished, that Georges Bataille kept hidden in the National Library in Paris whilst Benjamin tried to flee to America during World War II. And basically Adorno and Horkheimer, seeing Benjamin in Paris with no money, having kind of lost his regular stipend from his parents, who were industrialists in Germany, who were losing their income because of Nazi Germany and then being wealthy Jews. Basically, Adorno and Horkheimer, seeing this, gave Benjamin some kind of stipend to write this Arcades project, which was a massive study on kind of industrial Paris and art and politics, written in because this quite kind of eclectic kind of way. Horkheimer and Adorno basically just felt there wasn't enough Marx, there wasn't enough materialism in that book, that Benjamin went too much into descriptions of literature, into Baudelaire, into descriptions of his walks through the arcades of Paris. He was basically a flaneur. He took on the kind of characteristics of the flaneurs of the 1800s who slowly walked around Paris as almost kind of a protest, but kind of, they were kind of too cool, actually, to engage in a way. They were kind of bourgeois loafers in a way. And Benjamin was kind of playing on this, decades later. And Horkheimer and Adorno were like, okay, good, but you need to stick some more, Marx in there. You need to get more to the kind of, to concrete reality. Okay, it's not enough to kind of mess around with art and poetry, and under the notion that the different fragments of a different kind of artistic outputs can somehow be rearranged, and by reading them, you can see in them the history of capitalism that led to their kind of appearance, and somehow then perceive and then reconfigure capitalism. That's kind of Benjamin's idea, that you have different kind of objects, you can put them together in constellations, and thereby read somehow through these different objects in a constellation something about what led us to being here in our capitalist age, and then maybe rethink it. And Adorno and Horkheimer were like, okay, good, but this is just far too, in a sense, poetic. So basically said you need to read Marx. And I think they really literally meant you need to read him, not reread him. Because I think, it's evident that Benjamin hadn't read a lot. And he said that actually he really got turned on to Marx by his mistress, is it Dora Latchis, who was a communist in Moscow at some point. And I'm not quite sure if those dates completely coincide, actually. But in any case, it said that she'd certainly turned him on to Marxism. And at some point, he began to read more Marx, definitely also under pressure from Horkheimer and Adorno. And then you see him actually in arcades putting in more Marx. But, the thing there is that Adorno and Horkheimer were kind of woefully abstract as well and dealing with art rather than with economics and concrete politics. So I think really when you see the letters from Adorno and Horkheimer to Benjamin in the correspondence of Walter Benjamin, you can get a collective volume where you can read this. You really see that Adorno and Horkheimer are kind of trying to cover their own backs, or are kind of telling themselves to read Marx. The whole problem with the Frankfurt School, if there is a problem, is that it's not concrete enough. It's too much about reading art and talking about art to avoid the complications of actually doing politics, which I talk about in the book, and I kind of excuse that at some point.
Yeah, and that's something we see nowadays too, with like the return of ultra orthodox Marxism or whatever, accusing often the Frankfurt School of kind of going the wrong way within it. But I think throughout the book, you offer a nice understanding of the way that materialism and the interpretation of art do intersect. But we won't go into that.
Okay.
So you have a chapter, Adorno and Horkheimer, the elements of QAnon. And you outline Adorno and Horkheimer's approach to anti-Semitic thought that they put forward in the Dialectic of Enlightenment that links anti-Semitism to conspiratorial thinking and to paranoia in general, while also giving a description and brief history of the Q conspiracy itself. And very importantly, you lay out the argument of why thoughts like this can be so appealing to people and why QAnon in particular has been so successful. The conspiracy is an attempt to force the so-called new, while giving its believers active participation in its construction. So in short, like an alternative reality game with real-world consequences and massive opportunities for libidinal investment, the promise of astronomical returns, such as like the return of the uncorrupted mythical paradise or lost golden age that they promote. A part of me, like a large part, honestly, kind of wishes for this level of creativity amongst the left. And you cautiously argue for this as well. But I'm curious if you could talk about the downsides of a left pursuing this type of direction, and if you have any thoughts on how, if we do pursue it, to avoid the worst excesses that may accompany it, like how to avoid those downsides.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose where that chapter is largely going is I'm pointing towards the lack of a narrative, so that the humans need narratives, and the left isn't kind of promoting any convincing narrative lately, whereas the right is, and where the right isn't, people are kind of seizing it, seizing on the ability to kind of weave stories through space and in the internet, and they're making stories, and these stories tend to kind of veer towards the right. I think we have just this huge archive of archetypes in our brains and a tendency to scapegoat people. So if the narrative isn't very well directed, people will kind of make a narrative that's basically racist, and that's what you're seeing with QAnon, and that mirrors what Adorno and Horkheimer talk about in regard to Nazism in the 1930s and 40s. So yeah, I mean, I say that it's a real shame that the right are kind of having all the fun in spinning narratives, and the left need to kind of find a way to spin a narrative, but differently. So I don't really know where the risk is with the left. I think the left need to seize more on the value of creating a utopia. So, the idea that the left would create a utopia in which everyone was equal. If you sold that to the working class, hey, you can be the class that overthrows tyranny forever, that surely would be, an amazing narrative. But I think the problem is that we are too bogged down in national identities, and that's part of our makeup as human beings, national or local identities, that we find it very hard to perceive the heroism in making a kind of post-national utopia. But I think, if we can kind of sell that, that would be the thing to do. The only thing is that keeps happening is that does kind of get sold a bit by the far right, but as a national socialism, or some kind of red brownism, fascist communist crossover, left right crossover. How to avoid that, I don't know. I just think that the thing is that it's not so much that the right somehow weave narratives better. It's just that archetypes that spring out of the human brain when humans are under extreme pressure, especially when groups of humans are under extreme pressure, do produce right-wing politics or populist right-wing politics, and they don't seem to produce left-wing politics so much. I think there we have to break down the tendency of humans to try to categorize, themselves and the other. And that's really what Adorno talks about a lot, is this tendency to identify things, to categorize things. And if we can somehow address that and say that that is really the root of all our problems, we could also point out that racism is not good. Basically the tendency to categorize leads to the tendency to ascribe wage values to people and to racism. So this is the root of all our problems. And if we want to overcome this, we need to stop categorizing, to stop being racist, to stop categorizing in a social class sense, and to build, precisely something towards utopia. And that's a narrative. Yeah, that is the narrative we need to be pushing. It's just, unfortunately, that's not a narrative that arises from people's strife. Somehow, the human brain, and this is getting Jungian, it's not really anything that's in the book, but it does get touched upon a bit by Adorno and Horkheimer. I do kind of talk about this a bit. This tendency to project. So you, well, exactly that. They say there's a kind of tendency to take the worst aspects of yourself and put them onto the other. And this is how you end up with like the dirty foreigner. When people are under pressure, they feel kind of unclean or unworthy, and then it becomes the fault of somebody else. This being so kind of internal to the way humans think, I think this is the thing we're going to have to process. And the thing is, the whole thing about left is trying to avoid doing that. So, when we're talking about how can we make a left narrative, I think the thing is we have to realize that left narrative is not going to just arise out of people's anxieties like vomiting. That's what the right do. And the left needs to somehow go to people, okay, we have a problem, let's talk through this. I mean, there's moves towards this within the Sanders movement, what's left of that, whatever that's becoming, and the post-Corbyn movement in the UK of going to the public, hearing out their problems, condensing their problems into some kind of easily readable text, going back to them with that condensed, text. This is basically what you said. And by keeping doing that, maybe you avoid the knee-jerk reactions, which make so often the right wing sound really like the left wing, but with racism added. Because there's so much of what QAnon's saying is like basically you're complaining about the same things that the left are complaining about, but you've managed to throw in loads of like heinous Nazi shit. So yeah, we need to slow down the discourse to build a narrative. It's just a different way of narrative building. It's writing a narrative, not just having one appear,
Right. So I also want to talk about about mental health, which is a theme that goes throughout the book. You rightfully take up Fisher's aim to politicize mental illness. First appears in Capitalist Realism, and I think you can find in pretty much all of his work, even if it's more abstract in there. So, for instance, in the last chapter, I love this this passage. You write, "It is up to the left to adopt irrationality as a motor for the irrational act of compassion, the one political calling that can justify our empty human existence. It is from the depths of anxiety and depression that such an unrealistic mission arises. It is from the depths of psychosis that this calling is given an aesthetic form. These sicknesses, caused, as Fisher argues, by capitalism, carry a kaleidoscopic recording function that colors human ethics in the rich, hypersensitive palette of a manic episode or psychedelic experience, end quote. Now, the pushback on this is that many will say that mental health should be completely depoliticized, or at worst, even that Fisher, and I have to stress this, I think this is a very wrong interpretation. People will argue that Fisher is arguing or saying that depression isn't real, that it's a construct put out there, and that's what he means. So I was just wanted to ask if you could explain, why is it that mental health should be a field of political discourse and philosophical analysis rather than just looking at it as brain chemicals?
Well, I think it is partly brain chemicals, but I think those chemicals, can be altered by material reality. Yeah, just to answer the question. But yeah, I mean, I understand your question. Well, we do need to kind of justify this. Well, I think that the types of mental illness you have in capitalist society are different to pre-capitalist, and pre-capitalist societies are societies that should we say, are less capitalist, as there aren't really, I don't think, many that are just not capitalist. I think capitalism does exert a certain pressure, relating to status and to the need to constantly reinforce your status, such that you can never really say, okay, I've done my job. Hey, I'm cool. Everyone accepts me. I accept them. There's always a process of like having to reintegrate into your own social group and prove yourself again and again, often involving having a job and spending money, or actually always involving spending money somehow. So, I think these things run contrary to how humans, were designed to live. It's not how other animals live. And I think it does cause stress. And I think that during COVID, everyone suddenly was under more stress than before. So I think there's people who are fairly privileged who maybe feel more relaxed in life because they don't have the pressures you might have if you don't know where your rent's coming from constantly. I think that they saw pressure, but the thing is, whatever they felt was just much worse for anyone, who was poor. COVID disproportionately affected poor people, which is, how the book starts. I start by talking about that, and how that really kind of makes capitalist realism and the Frankfurt School, even more relevant than they were. But yeah, I mean, the kind of chicken and egg of, what came first in terms of what causes mental illness, the chemicals or the capitalism, etc. I mean, you can take this, you can probably say anything. It's like, when people fall in love and someone says, oh, it's just chemicals going off in your brain. But it's like, well, the chemicals have to be there or I couldn't be in love because we're physical beings. So I think that goes for depression as well. I don't think the fact that there's chemicals in your brain mean that you don't, the depression isn't caused by something. And of course, if someone comes and punches you or someone shouts at you for a sustained period, then you're going to have some chemical reaction go off in your brain. So if you put under physical pressure, people quite easily understand that will cause change in your brain that would have correspondent chemical processes. So it's the same thing with capitalism, which is akin to someone being very aggressive to you perpetually. So I don't think one can really ever discount capitalism as a cause of depression by saying that there are chemicals in the brain. And I think, of course, some people are born with a higher propensity towards depression, but that's also where, for example, Adorno called, I think it was Minima Moralia, was subtitled "The Melancholy Science," his book, because he was melancholic. Basically, we would say depression now. He was depressive, and Adorno talked a lot about the kind of abstract art and very dark art and literature, and how very dark, unfathomable art and literature can kind of intervene and disrupt the falsity of a capitalist world. I think this is part of the thing, that it's not just an issue of does capitalism cause mental illness. It's that it certainly has, an exacerbating factor and sometimes an outright cause, but also that there is this flip side that mental illness, like abstract art and like taking psychedelics, although they're different things, and like spontaneous spiritual experience, and also deliberate spiritual experience, they can reorder the world. They're not rational, and while not embracing irrationality as such, the irrational can break through the false rationality of capitalism. And that's where you feel shitty, and you feel shitty because you're under intense pressure from the capitalist system. And I'm kind of saying, well, don't feel bad. And it's what Fisher says at the end of Capitalist Realism. Take that and weaponize it. Use that.
Yeah, exactly. You actually made me think, especially at the beginning there, of like that stupid Rick and Morty scene. I don't know if you're familiar with it, where Rick goes off on Morty telling him not to fall in love and procreate because it's just a chemical trick of his brain. I find that argument, like you said, to be one of the dumbest arguments ever. Because of course everything has physical interactions to it. Like that component is there. It kind of like almost a deliberate way of sidestepping thinking about stuff. My final question, though, is a little different, and it's about aestheticization. So, as you quote in your book, Walter Benjamin stated, "The masses have a right to change property relations. Fascism seeks to give them an expression while preserving property. The logical result of fascism is the introduction of aesthetics into political life," end quote. And then in the Acid Communism introduction by Mark Fisher, he states that acid communism is, quote, "a provocation and a promise. It is a joke of sorts, but one with very serious purpose. It points to something that at one point seemed inviolable, but which now appears impossible: the convergence of class consciousness, socialist feminist conscious raising, and psychedelic consciousness, the fusion of new social movements with a communist project, and unprecedented aestheticization of everyday life." So I was wondering, end quote, what's the difference in, quote, an introduction of aesthetics into everyday life, or into political life, and quote, an unprecedented aestheticization of everyday life. So what is the difference there, that where Benjamin's describing a negative in fascism of aesthetics entering political life, and Fisher's describing a positive in acid communism?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's just that the aestheticization of life by the Nazi regime was something from the top down, where you're basically being controlled by the aesthetics. It's propaganda. It's like advertising. It is acting on behalf of the ruling elite, whereas Fisher's talking about a creativity that comes from the bottom up. That it's undertaken by all of us. It's kind of art for all. It is us finding ourselves through creativity. It's what the ruling elite don't want, because then we find ourselves, we don't want to go to work. I guess, or we don't want to work, in the same ways. We start to think something's not right about, I go to work, I basically make my wages in 4 hours, but I have to work 8 hours. This system will fall apart if people are made more aware, particularly if they're put more in touch with nature and each other, if we stop seeing the boundaries. And of course, fascism, Nazism was very good at aestheticizing so as to create boundaries. And, if we can kind of lose those boundaries, then we can act in solidarity, then the elite are in trouble. So, yeah, I mean, that's basically the answer. They're coming from different kind of ends of the social spectrum.
Right. I don't know Benjamin that well. But the way I was thinking about it was, it seems to me that the way Benjamin's describing it there, it's like the aesthetics are there to preserve the already existing order. So it's like you think you're enacting real systemic change, but really it's just a show parade. Whereas what Fisher is talking about is like almost the exact opposite. Like
what Benjamin's saying is that the mass production of images in the kind of, in the early 20th century to the mid 20th century, we're talking up to the kind of mid 1930s, when he wrote that essay, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, the mass production of images in magazines, postcards, biscuit tins, etc., suddenly gives the public this great access to to riches, to wealth, to attractive looking things, and the public start to want more. So the fascists diverted the public from wanting more property, more stuff, through fascist parades, through propaganda. And this is aimed at not letting people have access to this creative wealth they're looking at, because, then they're going to want property, wealth, money, etc. as well. So you get this diversion through parades and propaganda. And where I use that in that chapter in the book is that you can see that with Trump, with Boris Johnson, with Bolsonaro, with many other figures, that they basically, many other populist right-wing figures that we compare to fascists, that they basically take the public's thirst for more stuff that we get through the internet, through Instagram, the fact that the public is used to making decisions, to choosing so much today, and the public therefore can't understand why they can't make political decisions. They take that and say, you can now have what you want. So we can build a wall to keep out Mexicans, for example. Things that you just shouldn't really be doing that simply or easily, that are politically kind of unsound in the international context. But, that can be offered because that's what the public want to feel. They want to feel in control. But it's basically actually taking away their control. It's not giving them the total control of their lives they want, that they're led to believe they can have through Instagram, Facebook, etc. It's basically a smokescreen saying, hey, you can have this wall, but actually we're not even going to build the wall probably, and we're going to do a load of other shit to take even more wealth away from you, or to worsen your working conditions or whatever. So yeah, that's basically how Benjamin referred to that, and that's how I use that.
All right, excellent. Well, that's all the questions I had. I mean, like I said, I really liked the book. I just finished reading it the other day, and I'll be ordering a copy because I like hard copies. But of course, people, when it comes out, can get it on PDF or whatever.
Yeah, well, you get it in PDF. You'll get it in e-publishing files for Kindle, etc. Yeah. You can buy the book very soon. I don't know when, but it's going to be out for pre-order in the coming weeks, and we'll make it very clear that it's out. And until then, you can look at this memic book cover and mess around with it, make memes, get offended by it. I don't know, whatever you want to do is there for you. So yeah, great. Thank you for being here for this introduction to the book and its cover. And you'll be able to find this book on our Instagram, this book cover, so you can somehow copy and paste that. I'll also put up the kind of graphic from it, so the whole cover and the graphic, so you can more easily kind of appropriate it and use it for your own memes. Okay, so thank you for being with us, and you'll see us shortly.
If you have been enjoying our content, please consider registering your desire with the algorithm by liking and subscribing. This really does help us grow and reach a wider community. If you would like to support our work of documenting and nurturing the rise of post-capitalist desires, become a patron. This allows us to continue research-based memes, podcasts, and videos, as well as up our production value. Patrons receive early views of videos, exclusive content, and more, including physical art and the ability to directly influence our research topics. The building of a better world happens on many fronts. Turn on, tune in, and shape a future collective reality.